Imagine for a moment the United Kingdom around 1993. The grand party of the 80s was over, leaving behind a national headache. The country felt as though it was draped in grey, from the skies to the buildings to its very own Prime Minister, John Major. And the radio? Well, the music was imported. A wave of melancholy angst from Seattle had crossed the Atlantic and captured the soul of the youth. Grunge was brilliant, nobody denied that, but it was the sound of another place, someone else's sorrow. Britain had lost its confidence, its swagger, and most importantly, it had lost the sound of itself. The kingdom was desperate for a change, a revolution, but it didn't know that the answer wouldn't come from a politician. It would come from two recording studios, 200 miles apart. And then they arrived. From two wildly different corners of the ring. In the northern corner, hailing from Manchester, came Oasis. They didn't walk, they swaggered. They didn't talk, they snarled. Led by the Gallagher brothers, who only loved each other when they got bored of fighting, they carried the melodies of the Beatles and the attitude of football hooligans. They were simple, direct, and they believed they were the greatest band in the world long before the world had a chance to agree. And in the southern corner, from London, was Blur. They were everything Oasis was not. They were art school graduates who read books and wrote clever songs about English life with sharp, witty satire. If Oasis was a straight punch to the face, Blur was a clever wink that you only understood a moment later. One side saw themselves as self-proclaimed rock and roll gods, the other, the princes of art pop. This wasn't just a battle for the #1 spot on the charts, it was a clash of class, of geography, of attitude. This was the battle that would define Britpop. And it was about to get very, very loud. Before the war, there were the opening salvos, and from the north, it was an all-out invasion. In 1994, Oasis unleashed their debut album, Definitely Maybe. It wasn't just a record, it was a mission statement. It was the sound of 5 lads in a damp rehearsal room kicking down the door to the music industry. The sound was a glorious, unsophisticated wall of noise. The guitars were turned up to 11, the drums were thunderous, and the lyrics were pure, uncut aspiration. This wasn't music about navel-gazing or complaining about the rain. It was about escaping the rain. It was about believing, even if just for the 3 minutes of a song, that you could be a rock and roll star. It was raw, arrogant, and precisely the injection of pure confidence that Britain had been waiting for. At the heart of this hurricane were the Gallagher brothers. Noel, the elder, was the grumpy genius behind the songs, a man who could write a stadium-size anthem on a battered acoustic guitar. And then there was Liam. He wasn't just a singer, he was a force of nature. Part John Lennon, part angry bulldog. He had a voice that could cut through steel, and a stage presence that was both captivating and confrontational. Their constant fighting wasn't a bug, it was the feature. The friction between Noel's songwriting ambition and Liam's raw, chaotic energy was the very engine of Oasis. They were the real deal, and the youth of Britain knew it.
But while the North was building an empire out of power chords and Parkers, the South was plotting a different kind of revolution. Blur had been around for a few years, but they had realized that trying to compete with the American sound was a losing game. So they did something radical. They decided to become aggressively, unapologetically British. With their album Parklife, Blur didn't just write songs, they created a universe. It was a colourful caricature of English life, filled with quirky characters, witty observations, and melodies so catchy they were borderline criminal. There was the monotonous, hypnotic pulse of girls and boys, a satire of holiday hedonism. And then there was the title track, Parklife, a cheeky spoken-word tour of Britain's strange habits, narrated by a famous character actor. This was pop music as social commentary. Damon Albarn wasn't a rock god staring at the heavens, he was a sharp-eyed observer sitting on a park bench, taking notes on the absurdity of it all. Blur made being British feel clever again. They embraced the irony, the eccentricity, and the mundane details of life that Oasis was trying so desperately to escape. They weren't just a band, they were the architects of a new movement, a celebration of British culture that would soon be given a name: Cool Britannia. By the start of 1995, the battle lines were drawn. Oasis had the hearts of the people, the raw energy of the streets. Blur had the minds of the critics, the wit of the art schools. The country was divided. You couldn't like both, you had to choose a side. And the music press was more than happy to fan the flames. The music press, led by the all-powerful NME, treated the rivalry like a heavyweight boxing match. They crafted the narrative. It was North versus South, working-class authenticity versus middle-class irony. The Gallagher brothers, never ones to shy away from a good insult, provided endless ammunition. But the simmering tension finally boiled over into open warfare in the summer of 1995. It began, as these things often do, with an ego-driven decision. Blur announced they would be releasing their new single, a jaunty, almost cartoonish track called Country House. In a moment of supreme competitive arrogance, Oasis declared that they would release their new single, the stomping rock anthem Roll With It, on the very same day. The challenge had been set. This was no longer a war of words, it was a head-to-head battle for the coveted #1 spot. What followed was a week of national madness. The event was dubbed the Great British Chart Battle, and it spilled out from the music papers onto the evening news. It was discussed in Parliament. Your grandmother had an opinion on it. The choice between the two songs was presented as a profound cultural decision, treated with the same gravity as a royal wedding or a general election. Country House was classic Blur, a clever, bouncy story about a rich man escaping the city, complete with a famously silly music video featuring a pig. Roll With It was classic Oasis, a straightforward, fist-pumping blast of rock and roll energy. One was a witty observation, the other was a defiant roar. The entire country held its breath. On a Sunday evening in August, the nation huddled around their radios for the official chart countdown. The numbers were announced. Oasis had sold an incredible 216,000 copies. But Blur had sold 274,000.
Blur had won. The Southern Art School boys had defeated the Northern rock gods. Damon Albarn celebrated by appearing on the TV show Top of the Pops, smugly wearing an Oasis t-shirt. It seemed the war was over. The witty, clever pop of Blur had triumphed over the brute force of rock and roll. But winning a battle is not the same as winning the war. While Blur celebrated their victory, Noel Gallagher was preparing to unleash a weapon that would change everything. The battle of the singles was over, but the battle of the albums was about to begin. And Oasis was about to drop a cultural atom bomb. Just a few weeks after losing the battle, Oasis released their second album, What's the Story, Morning Glory. And it wasn't just an album, it was a cultural event. It was a collection of songs so powerful, so universal, that they transcended the charts and became the very soundtrack of the decade. While Blur's new album, The Great Escape, was clever and full of the same witty observations as Parklife, it suddenly felt like a continuation of the past. Oasis, on the other hand, sounded like the future. Noel Gallagher had crafted a set of modern-day hymns. Songs like Wonderwall and Don't Look Back in Anger weren't just for indie kids anymore. They were for everyone. They were sung by millions in pubs, at weddings and on football terraces. They were simple, honest and inescapable. The result was a total cultural shift. Oasis became monumental. They were no longer just a British phenomenon, they were a global one. Their success culminated in the summer of 1996 with 2 legendary concerts at Knebworth Park. They played to 250,000 people over 2 nights. But the truly staggering fact was that over 2.5 million people, nearly 4% of the entire UK population, had applied for tickets. It wasn't just a concert, it was a pilgrimage. It was the absolute peak of Britpop, and Oasis were the undisputed kings. Faced with this tidal wave of Oasis mania, Blur did the only thing they could. They retreated. Damon Albarn later said, he felt the Britpop scene had become a shallow, jingoistic cartoon, and he wanted out. The band abandoned the cheeky pop sound they had perfected and pivoted towards a scruffier, more lo-fi indie American style. It was a brave artistic move that effectively signalled their abdication from the Britpop throne. Ironically, their new sound would give them their biggest ever hit in America with Song 2, but their war with Oasis was over. So the verdict was in. Blur may have won the battle on that famous August evening, but Oasis had unquestionably won the war. They hadn't just topped the charts, they had dominated the entire cultural landscape on their own terms. They had become the band of a generation. But looking back now, decades later, did the winner of this famous battle really matter as much as the battle itself? The answer, of course, is no. The real winner of the Britpop war wasn't Oasis or Blur, it was British music. The rivalry, as petty and media-fueled as it was, created a perfect storm of creative energy. It pushed both bands to their absolute limits, forcing them to write the defining albums of their careers. The constant competition lit a fire under the entire British music scene, creating that brief, glorious era known as Cool Britannia, a time when it felt like London was the undisputed centre of the cultural universe. For a few years, British fashion, British art, and most of all, British music, felt like the most important things in the world. Decades later, the bitter arguments have faded into nostalgia. The question of whether you were in Oasis camp or Blur camp seems almost quaint. What remains is the music. The songs have outlasted the headlines, the insults, and the egos. Wonderwall is still the song everyone tries to play on an acoustic guitar at a party. Don't Look Back in Anger is still an anthem of resilience sung in unison by stadiums full of people. And Parklife is still a perfect, witty snapshot of a time and a place that no longer exists. Ultimately, the battle between Oasis and Blur wasn't really about North versus South or working class versus middle class. It was about the magic of being young, when a new single could feel like a declaration of war, and a band could feel like they were your band. It was a brief, noisy, and brilliant moment in time, and we were all lucky to have a front row seat. So the question has to be asked, and it's time to settle it in our comments section. Where did your allegiance lie back in the day? Were you Team Oasis or Team Blur? Let us know down below and tell us which song from that era means the most to you. And of course, if you enjoyed this trip back to the age of bucket hats and Britpop, be sure to like the video and subscribe to The Nostalgia Brit for more journeys into the past.